This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. Just a heads up, this episode contains discussions of sexual assault and sex trafficking. Some may find it upsetting. We encourage you to take care of yourself. Welcome to today's episode of From Now On, where we dive into the most important issues that shape our society. Today, we confront a harrowing and often hidden crisis: the sex trafficking pandemic in America. This pervasive issue infiltrates various facets of our culture, including the glamorous yet shadowy world of hip hop. Our focus today centers on the groundbreaking work of investigative journalist Brian Joseph, whose book, Vegas Concierge: Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America, unveils the intricate web of exploitation lurking beneath the neon lights of Las Vegas. Through meticulous research and courageous reporting, Brian exposes how sex trafficking operates within elite circles, implicating figures in the hip-hop industry and beyond. In Vegas Concierge, Brian Joseph takes us from the opulent suites of the Las Vegas Strip to the inner sanctums of law enforcement and media outlets, revealing a tapestry of corruption and indifference. He sheds light on the methods pimps and traffickers use to exploit victims, the systemic failures of law enforcement investigations, and the self-serving interests that compromise news organizations and corridors of power. More than anything, this work examines the disregard American society has towards sex trafficking victims. Recent high-profile cases have brought the issue to the forefront. Notably, music mogul Sean Diddy Combs faces serious charges, including racketeering, conspiracy, and sex trafficking by force, fraud, and coercion. Allegations detail a pattern of abuse, coercion, and exploitation spanning decades, with claims that Combs orchestrated drug-fueled sex parties known as freak-offs, where women, men, and trans people were subjected to physical and emotional abuse. If convicted, Combs faces a minimum of 15 years in prison. These revelations are not isolated. The hip-hop industry has seen multiple figures accused of similar crimes. For instance, Houston rapper Jackery Nathaniel Anderson, known as Slando Kareem, was sentenced to life in prison for sex trafficking minors as an adult. Such cases underscore a disturbing intersection between entertainment, power, and exploitation. Today, we are honored to have Brian Joseph join us to discuss his investigative journey, the challenges he faced in bringing these stories to light, and the broader implications of his findings. His work not only exposes the darkness within the entertainment industry, but also calls for societal reckoning with the pervasive issue of sex trafficking. Stay with us as we explore these critical topics, aiming to raise awareness and inspire action against the exploitation that continues to plague our communities. Today's guest has worked as a newspaper reporter and an investigative journalist for about 20 years, writing for the Las Vegas Review-Journal, the Orange County Register, and the Sacramento Bee, among other publications. He is also the author of Vegas Concierge: Sex Trafficking, Hip Hop, and Corruption in America. I am so excited today to welcome Brian Joseph to From Now On. Welcome, Brian.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I'm so happy you're here too. It's a very important conversation that means a lot to me. I'm excited to learn more. So last fall, your book, Vegas Concierge, was published. This book details a real story that spans a decade. Can you give a short synopsis of the book for our audience?
Essentially, what Vegas Concierge does is it uses the story of a years-long investigation into sex trafficking in Las Vegas as a narrative vehicle to explore how American society fails victims and survivors of sex trafficking.
So in your book, you shape the story around three subjects. Who are those subjects, and why did you decide to bring multiple voices into the narrative of the book?
Well, the book primarily focuses on a survivor, Angela Williams, a retired vice sergeant, Don Hoyer, and then much later in the book, I come in as a figure. And we really focused on all three of those subjects because it provided a way to look at the story and the issue from a number of different angles. Sex trafficking is a very complicated and nuanced issue, and it's often very difficult to portray it through one person's voice or one person's eyes. And so by spreading the story out through multiple perspectives, I felt that we were able to see the true picture in a more complete light.
Mhm. I appreciate that you gave a survivor a voice.
I don't know that you could do this story appropriately without giving a survivor a voice. I find it very inappropriate to
Mm.
talk about sex trafficking without giving a voice to survivors and victims.
So, as someone who has experienced being trafficked, I was grateful to read a story that was balanced, humanizing, and also intentional in detailing the reality of sex trafficking. What inspired you to investigate sex trafficking?
It really began as sort of a casual conversation. I was talking with an editor who mentioned that I had previously done some reporting on foster care, and if I had done foster care, maybe I'd be interested in writing about sex trafficking. Because I had written about foster care, I thought, well, there's some similarities between people who are involved in foster care and people who are involved in sex trafficking. They're both marginalized populations. They're both populations that policymakers don't often think a great deal about. And so
Hmm.
I thought, well, if I've been able to write about foster care, maybe I'd be able to take those lessons and apply it to sex trafficking.
Hmm.
It was true that there was some crossover between the two, but I had a lot to learn, and it took me a while to really get my feet under me before I felt comfortable truly reporting on this issue in a comprehensive way.
Hmm. Did you have a problem with getting people to talk at first?
Absolutely. As you understand, this is a very sensitive and complex topic, and I think a lot of people in their previous experiences with the media have not received the sort of
Hmm.
compassion
Hmm.
and attention that they would have liked. And so I had to spend a lot of time initially showing my sources that I had done my homework and that I cared about showing this issue in all its nuances and all its grays. And so a big part of my initial reporting was really just showing people that I cared about this issue in a genuine way, and that I wanted to tell it in its entire detail.
Didn't you have a news organization that supported you in the beginning, and then when you started speaking out more about this, they try to kill your stories?
I wouldn't necessarily put it precisely that way.
Hmm.
I was working for a newspaper when I first started reporting on this.
Hmm.
Uh, During the course of that time, they grew frustrated with the pace of my reporting
Right.
and eventually let me go. And
Hmm.
so I ended up doing this on my own.
Okay. Okay. So it wasn't the topic of sex trafficking they were trying to mute.
I can't speak for why they let me go.
Oh, okay. Okay. Gotcha. So human trafficking and sex trafficking are terms that have been gaining awareness over the last 15 years. But there is a lot of misinformation out there. Can you share some of the most frustrating examples of misinformation around sex trafficking?
Gosh, I think we could probably do an entire episode just about that one topic. From my perspective, one of the most frustrating issues as it relates to depictions of sex trafficking is how the media, whether it's in pop culture and entertainment or in the news media,
Hmm.
portrays this issue. I think a lot of people, as a result, believe that victims and survivors of sex trafficking look like someone who is a character in a Liam Neeson movie or
Hmm.
in like The Equalizer or something like
Hmm.
that. There's often this portrayal of sex trafficking victims as uh, women from another country who are
Hmm.
very much aware that they are being harmed. And that's one portrayal. Another portrayal is, frankly, of just a street prostitute who is a dirty person and
Hmm.
is not valued in society. Uh, both of those portrayals are, in my opinion, horribly incorrect
Hmm.
and frankly grotesque.
Hmm.
Uh, this issue has so many nuances, so much complexity, and those stereotypical two-dimensional portrayals are just not accurate. I felt it was very important in this book to offer a well-rounded portrayal of what victims and survivors look like, because I felt that in the news media and in pop culture, you weren't seeing a true depiction of what sex trafficking really looks like in the real
Hmm.
world. And so a lot of time and effort was spent in trying to make sure that we portrayed this in as an accurate and authentic way as possible.
Hmm. Yeah, I was thinking when I was reading the book that I wish I had read it a few years ago when I had started speaking out. I had, told my story several times through like depositions or through my attorneys, and they kept saying, "Well, you were trafficked," and I was like, "No, of course I'm not. I wasn't trafficked." Like almost like thinking like what you described was trafficking, of like you have to be a prostitute, like on the street, or
Or
someone just thrown into a van, or
exactly, you
like
have to be kidnapped or
I
something
had all
like
these
that.
ideas of what sex trafficking was, and they kept saying, no, Jeffrey Epstein sent you on a plane. He booked the plane, he put you on the plane, he sent you to LA to meet with somebody. He was trafficking you because of what happened when I got there. But in my mind, I didn't think of it as that until I met the other women who were trafficked to the same man at the same time. So that was a hard one for me to understand, that I was trafficked. And then I started researching what trafficking really is, this modern day trafficking that, you write about in your book.
I think that's such a common experience. I think so many
Mhm.
people who have been a victim and survivor of sex trafficking often don't recognize themselves
Mhm.
in that depiction until
Mhm.
much later on, when they've had an opportunity to really steep themselves in what trafficking looks like in the real world, not how it's portrayed in pop culture, not how we think about it, but how it really plays itself out in reality.
Mhm. Well, that's also because at the time, whoever's masterfully manipulating you, also you think maybe they're a good person, or they're looking out for you, or they couldn't possibly be trafficking you to do something harmful to you, right? Until later on you realize, oh my goodness. And
Absolutely.
no, that seems like what, the characters in the book were describing.
Absolutely, manipulation is a I think a core component of trafficking, and there's so many misconceptions about what
Mhm.
manipulation, brainwashing looks like,
Mhm.
and it can be very difficult for people to wrap their mind around what manipulation is, because it can be so subtle, because it can be so casual, and so as a result, oftentimes, as you know,
Right.
victims of it themselves don't even see themselves as victims until much later on, until they've
Mhm.
had an opportunity to see
Mhm.
what the components of manipulation and brainwashing truly look like.
Mhm. And also as you see others were in the same position that you were.
It's very powerful and I think very important for victims and survivors to hear the stories of others so they can
Mhm.
begin to see, oh, that's similar to my story. Oh, that maybe that's what I experienced as well.
Well, that's the whole idea from now on, right?
Absolutely.
So that other people listening or watching can see themselves in the stories.
It's
Yeah.
critical. It's critical to spread the awareness.
It's unfortunate that that's like usually the reason why you realize something about yourself is you see it in someone else.
What does that say about society
I
that
know.
we it requires us to
Mhm.
view someone else's pain before we can understand our own pain? I think
Well,
that says a lot about our lack of self awareness as a society.
that's also, I mean, people watch TV and movies, right? And it's portrayed so differently in TV and movies. If it was portrayed properly, then people would probably get it a little easier.
It's disgusting to me now looking back on so many things I've seen in pop culture, how they portray pimps, how they portray traffickers.
Mhm.
They're often played for laughs or for
Mhm.
gags, or alternatively portrayed as very cool, suave individuals, and that's disgusting to me.
Mhm. I agree. How would you define sex trafficking?
Of course, I'm an investigative reporter, so my initial instinct is to cite the more generic legalese
Mhm.
definition, which is that sex trafficking is sexual exploitation through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. That's not a very satisfying definition, I
Mhm.
think. As we discussed earlier, I believe that manipulation, brainwashing plays a critical component of that. And I don't believe that you can truly understand sex trafficking until you begin to wrap your mind around what manipulation truly looks like and involves.
Mhm. Yeah, manipulation usually is grooming.
Absolutely.
100% always grooming. Mhm.
Absolutely, yeah, and I don't think many people who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about grooming truly
Mhm.
understand what that looks like.
Mm-mm. No, most people don't understand grooming.
Sometimes that's a good reason, right? Because grooming can be such a casual interaction and can use so many other uh, components of a healthy relationship or a healthy
Mhm.
interaction that it
Mhm.
can be very corrosive and
Mhm.
very uh, confusing for
Right.
people.
But grooming with the reason to sexually exploit you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
what people don't understand is that uh, there's an intent, there's an
Mhm.
intelligence behind
Mhm.
this, that there's
A plan, a
a plan.
plot.
Exactly,
Yes.
yes, exactly.
Mhm. There's an end result that you want.
Exactly. There's
Mhm.
a chess game going on, and they're manipulating you through a number of steps to get you to a place where then they can exploit you.
So your story mainly focuses on a pimp with the moniker Molly Mall, Before we go deeper into that story, how would you define a pimp?
Pimp is a sex trafficker. I don't believe that there should be any distinction between the two. In popular culture today, we often describe pimps as in a more casual terms or more non-threatening terms as men who organize prostitutes. I don't believe that's an accurate depiction at all. These are people who are trafficking women into the life, into sex work, and
Mhm.
they are for the most part. I never want to speak in absolutes, but for the most part are cold-hearted individuals who are preying on people's weaknesses, exploiting them in order to make a buck for themselves.
Mhm. Yeah, a lot of times there's extreme violence.
It can be
Mhm.
absolutely. There are different forms of pimping. There's guerrilla pimping through extreme violence, and then there's
Mhm.
also the more finesse style, you might call it, through the Romeo style of pimping, where it's a lot of romance and buttering somebody up
Right,
to
right.
feel comfortable to do this sort of work.
Or like a mentorship or doing things for you that you feel like
Absolutely.
obligated to. Mhm. Yeah, well, so many rappers glorify pimping, like Big Pimping, the Jay-Z song, and
Well,
yeah.
the Big Pimping is an interesting song because the one of the performers in that song, Pimp C, uh, was a good friend of the survivor featured in my book, and he,
Mhm.
as depicted in a book about his life, actually tried to talk her out of the life of prostitution. So,
Mhm.
it, it,
Oh,
it,
so that's more of a positive story of a pimp.
well, Pimp C was not a pimp himself, but my point is that uh, hip hop does portray pimps, but often its portrayal of pimps um,
Accurate.
is not accurate,
Okay.
or it can be confusing in that
Okay.
someone who is portraying a pimp in actuality doesn't support that sort of behavior.
Right.
I want to make very clear that while my book does look into hip hop, I didn't find anything intrinsic to hip hop culture.
Mhm.
There was anything essential in hip hop culture relating to the exploitation of women or men. Rather, it's my conclusion that hip hop was born in places of lower socioeconomic
Mhm.
status,
Mhm.
and sadly, there's a connection between environments like that and sex trafficking. Hip
Mhm.
hop merely reflects the things that were happening in its community, and sadly, uh, prostitution and pimping and sex trafficking has occurred in some of our lower economic communities.
Mhm.
That does not mean, however, that I believe that hip hop is to blame for sex trafficking, or that there's anything essential about hip hop and trafficking. You can have wonderful hip hop artists that have nothing to do with pimping
Of course, yeah.
or prostitution.
Mhm.
Missy Elliott,
Right.
um, Lauryn Hill come to mind.
Mhm.
Wonderful hip hop artists at the top of their game who have nothing to do with this sort of behavior,
Of course, yeah. Those are women.
and some of the best, in my opinion.
Yes. Um, I have a question that I was thinking about because you said the lower socioeconomic, this is the way of life with some of them, to make money. They don't have a lot of means. Is that different from what your book talks about in Vegas, where the majority of the women that are sex trafficked are white?
I would argue that it's not different because it's all exploitation at the end of the day.
Mhm.
Yes, you're correct when you talk about there are certain segments of the pimp prostitute subculture that believe that a white prostitute is more valuable than
Mhm.
a woman of any other racial identity.
Mhm.
Um, but it's still trafficking, it's still exploitation, and it's still horrible, no matter um, who it's happening to, under what circumstances, the money involved, any of those things. I think it's I understand the question, but I
Mhm.
think when you start trying to segment
Right, exactly.
different types of survivors, different types of trafficking, it muddies the waters.
Right.
And
Okay.
in some people's mind, they might think, well, if it's higher end trafficking, maybe it's not so bad. It's all bad
It's all
under
bad,
all
yeah. Mhm.
circumstances, and we should view it as a plight on our society, however it happens. Not
Right.
not just say, oh well, if it's happening on the street, it must be bad. But if it's happening in
Yeah.
hotels, it must be okay. It's bad no matter where it happens.
No matter where it happens, in your communities, in Vegas, with the elites, with the politicians, it doesn't matter.
It's
It's all
grotesque.
sex
It
trafficking,
is
it's all.
grotesque and wrong under any circumstances, and it
Mhm.
should be a priority for us to, as a society, to address right now.
Absolutely. So I want to talk about, what is the MO of a real pimp? How do young women protect themselves from being groomed by a pimp?
Well, I think it starts with awareness. I think
Okay.
it starts by understanding what these sort of relationships can look like,
Mhm.
and being aware and being sort of on guard for what people's ulterior motives might be. That being said, it can be very difficult to talk about trafficking because each pimps or traffickers uh, mo, their techniques can be different,
Mm,
and
okay.
each interaction is its own interaction. And so while we might talk about these issues in theory or on paper, in order to understand what is happening in an interaction, you have to look at each interaction on its own. And so,
Mhm.
the best that I can say is that someone who's concerned about being victimized in this sort of way, it should be generally aware. A, of what these sort of interactions can look like and do look like. And at the same time, they should just be aware of themselves and their surroundings and who they're interacting with. Uh, it's important in today's culture where you can meet somebody online and barely understand them or barely
Mhm.
know them,
Mhm.
to be very cautious about the people we interact with. And so, while you might know someone from their public persona, it's important to know them on your own terms. And so, I would just advise people to be very cautious in their initial meetings with people and get to know them,
Mhm.
and to listen to those voices inside about whether something seems off or not.
I'm often asked that question, so I'm just thinking. Um, a lot of times I tell the young girl to say, you can meet my mom or you can meet my dad, usually the dad,
Mhm.
and then they can see if that's okay for me to travel with you. A lot of times you bring up that you have a boundary, like you meet my parents first, then a lot of times they'll move on to somebody else.
I think that's a really good advice. I mean, my sense is that traffickers typically want to move quickly and
Um,
want to get their hooks into people quickly, and so the more that a potential victim can put the brakes on things, can slow things down, I think that will show or force the hand of a trafficker to show what they're truly after. Because
mhm.
my sense is that they want to make money as quickly
Oh
as
yeah.
possible. And so
Mhm.
as a result, if you're continually slow playing them, that may frustrate them and force them to move on to someone else.
Right.
The difficulty with that, there are pimps who are very canny, who are willing to drag out their grooming process for quite some
Oh, that's
time.
so
And
true.
so that is where it can become very tricky for the victim, because if a pimp is willing to invest months or even
Mhm.
years in the grooming process,
Mhm.
it can be very difficult to root out what their true intentions are.
Mhm.
Uh, so again, oftentimes I think the best that we can do is to educate people, and to encourage them to listen to the voices inside
Mhm.
their head
Mhm.
that say something feels off
Right.
here, because
Mhm.
our intuition, our instincts are often correct in those
Right.
situations.
That's so true. That gut instinct. Like, listen to it.
We have to.
Yeah, and you reminded me, yeah, a lot of times I know Jeffrey Epstein, it was 4 months before he actually got me to go back and see him. It was 4 long months of saying no, that I had no interest. So, yeah, you're right. They will take a long time, and also groom the parents as well.
And think about how corrosive that can be, because
Mhm. So
when they're willing to put in that sort of time, it puts your guard down.
mhm, of course. Yeah, it's like,
I,
"Oh, they really care about me."
I find it so disturbing that sex traffickers and pimps seem to understand a certain level of psychology. They understand people on a certain level and are able to manipulate them through things like dragging out the grooming process, which can be so corrosive, as I said before, and also just so manipulative. It can be so confusing for the person on the other side, because you would think that if someone is willing to spend quite a lot of time uh, grooming you that they couldn't possibly be dangerous,
Mm-mm.
when in reality, those might
Mm-hmm.
be the most dangerous
Mm-hmm.
people that you could be interacting with.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. And based on your book, the traits of a pimp are the same traits of a serial predator.
Absolutely. No, there's no doubt in my mind that that's true.
Mm. That's scary.
I think, I believe I've heard it said that that pimps have the same traits as psychopaths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because serial predators have the same traits as psychopaths. So that makes sense. So there is some crossover with the hip hop industry with Molly Mall. Can you tell me about that?
The main crossover, of course, is that Molly Mall is the primary trafficker featured in the book, and he is also a hip hop music producer. We used that connection as an opportunity to then explore how pimping is portrayed in hip hop, and we touched on some other figures who had some connections to pimping, or at least a portrayal of pimping. And as you mentioned before, it is a common theme, sadly, in hip hop, and oftentimes in hip hop, it is not portrayed in an accurate fashion.
Mm.
Pimping is portrayed as loving the ladies, or being a super lover, or being someone
Mm-hmm.
of
A playboy.
charisma. Yeah, and indeed, our language today reflects
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember being in college, seeing a buddy of mine wearing something nice, and being like, "Oh, you're pimping today,"
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I look back on that and feel horrified, because I
Mm-hmm.
was using a term that I didn't quite understand. It's almost as though we've soft pedaled a horror or horrific term like Nazism and made it acceptable in today's
Mm-hmm.
society, and I just find that very upsetting.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like that song P.I.M. Pete, which is about a pimp. I looked it up.
We
But
feature that in
everyone's
the book.
yeah, but everyone's like dancing to it and saying the words of the song, but not even realizing what you're talking about.
That song is particularly um, blunt in its depictions
Mhm.
of pimping,
Mhm.
and you're right. It is upsetting because it has a catchy beat.
Mhm.
For a long time in my life, I would hear that
Yeah.
and enjoy that song,
Yeah, it was a hot
and
song.
now when I hear songs like that, I find myself turning the channel.
Mhm. Same here. So you're saying Molly Mall uses profits from pimping to fund his producer rapping career.
That's how it appears. Yes,
Do you know some of the artists that he's been associated with?
he's been associated with a number of artists. Uh, Probably the two biggest are being Justin Bieber and Drake.
Mhm. But Justin probably wasn't aware of what was going on, I would assume.
I My job as a journalist is not to assume anything.
So, a few of the survivors on my show have shared stories where they were coerced to travel to Las Vegas under the guise of being hired to go to a party for well-known hip hop artists at a club. And when they arrived, they are pushed to sleep with strangers and ultimately not get paid. Would you consider that sex trafficking?
On the surface, it certainly sounds like it. My instincts, of course, as a researcher, is to want to better understand the individual circumstances. But based on what you've told me, yes, it sounds like trafficking.
Mm-hmm. Is a common way to begin to groom people to get into the sex industry.
By having them
Picking them
come to
up in
Vegas,
Houston, saying they're there for a hip hop party, and then when they get there to the hotel, they're coerced into having sex with strangers.
that I believe is one common avenue into the sex industry. Again, uh, there is no one way that this
Mhm.
happens, and this can happen in so many variety of pathways. And so it's important to not get hung up on one particular uh, series of events that leads
Okay.
into sex work or into trafficking. But yes, you're correct that my understanding is that that is at least one common uh, series of events that can lead someone into being trafficked.
So a lot of times they're not told up front that they're going to have sex with strangers or get paid to have sex. They're just told you're coming to a party or you're going on a road trip. They're not told what exactly is going to happen when they get there.
Absolutely.
And that's the majority of the time.
Absolutely. This is often treated in a very casual sort of way.
Mhm.
You might have fun. You might make some money.
Anything to like trick them to get into the car and go with you.
I think pimps are smart enough to recognize that by explicitly saying, "I would like you to have sex with a stranger when you come to this event," that they realize that most people would not agree to that. So instead, they soft pedal it.
Did you find that there was a pipeline for pimps to coerce individuals interested in the entertainment and modeling industries?
My sense is that that is a, a a common pathway again into this lifestyle, into this world. Um, I don't know that I know enough to be able to definitively say a pipeline. Pipeline has an implication of a very large uh, uh, um, scale of
Mm,
this happening, and I
right.
don't know that I know that enough to be able to say that definitively. That being said, I'm hedging my words here because I am a researcher, and I
Right.
believe it's important
Mm-hmm.
to stick to what I know,
Okay.
and it's also important to recognize that trafficking is an illegal activity that occurs in the dark, and so
Mm,
it's very difficult for anyone to be able to say definitively this is happening a lot or this is not happening a lot because by its very nature it is a secretive behavior. And
mm-hmm.
so
Okay.
I do think it's important for someone in my position to speak uh, soberly about it, not
Right.
to to exaggerate the facts. But I do believe it's important if you're interacting with people in those sort of situations to have your guard up.
Yeah, because that's one incident that can happen, picking you up and taking you to Vegas or somewhere where you're forced to have sex with strangers. But the reason why I was asking that question is because also a lot of times they prey on young women's dreams and ambitions of wanting to be a model or an actress. So they say, "Oh, we have a modeling job for you," or "We have a really important person for you to meet in the acting world, a producer or director," and then they get excited and then they go along with it.
That's
That's to me a common theme of how a lot of people are coerced into it.
that's expert manipulating right there by dangling what somebody wants and using that as a smokescreen
Hmm.
to uh, to get them into the situation and then to flip the script on them and put them into a completely different scenario than what they'd intended.
Right. And that's why a lot of times they prey on young women who come to LA, just with big dreams and starry eyed.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Again, it's gross that we live in a world like this, but manipulation oftentimes preys on the things that we most want,
Hmm.
and so it's very important to, even if you're excited about something, to take a step back and really assess the situation and see, truly is this truly what I'm getting myself into, or could there be another ulterior motive at play?
Hmm. Something that was shocking from the legal side of things was how the vice cops focus on arresting victims of sex trafficking rather than their traffickers, the pimps. Can you explain to the audience why that is?
Well, I would first, to answer that question, the first thing I would say is that um, it's really important to recognize that not every person in law enforcement is the same. There are
Hmm.
some people who very much understand this issue and have a great deal of compassion for this issue and have the right priorities. Don Hoyer, the primary law enforcement figure in the book, is a perfect
Hmm.
example of that. He understood the stakes, understood the situation, and was very much had it was very much his priority to arrest pimps and to go after traffickers. Where it becomes more muddied is when you have law enforcement officers who are not as educated on this issue and want to just, for example, show numbers, show that they're
Hmm.
addressing the problem through
Hmm.
the scale of arrests they're doing. It's situations like that where arresting large numbers of prostitutes becomes the goal of certain officers to show that they're making a dent on the prostitution
Hmm.
issue. Those officers are maybe well intentioned, but don't quite understand the issue and uh, uh, the inherent dynamics at play. That being said, uh, Don Hoyer, again the main law enforcement source in the book, would argue that the arresting of prostitutes serves an important purpose in building the case against pimps
Hmm.
later on down the line, as well as building a rapport with prostitutes. And his argument is that if law enforcement is not regularly interacting with women who are engaged in prostitution, those women are going to completely fall off the radar and are going to never have good interactions with the police and are therefore never going to have any reason to turn to the police when they're ready
Mhm.
to break away from their
Mm.
trafficker. So he would argue that it's important to continue engaging in arrests of women engaged in prostitution in order for the downstream effects, in order
Mhm.
to build rapport and in order to build cases against traffickers down the line.
Well, I think Don realized that most of these women that were arrested didn't want they were in fear. They didn't want to speak out about their pimp. S
Absolutely, and it would often take time, he
Mhm.
found, to build trust with these
Mhm.
women before they were able to truly talk to him about what was going on.
Well, and also to be able to do that, wouldn't you be able to eventually have some type of program where if they wanted to get out of it, 'cause I would assume most of them want to get out of it, but they're too scared to, a program that moves them out of it safely.
Yes, I think that, well, the way where that has to start though is with a relationship, with a trusting relationship, and what Don would say is that by interacting regularly with these women and girls, you're able to start building that trust. It's this is where it becomes difficult talking about trafficking because you're right. Our instinct is to go, well, there must be a program to do this. Well, if you stop and think about that though, what could that possibly look like? I mean, there's
Mhm.
I each person's situation is unique and different, and it's very
Mhm.
difficult to design a one size fits all program that can
Right.
treat a woman in this situation versus a woman in that situation. So as a result, what that program eventually in reality comes down to is really just a motivated person
Mhm.
who cares about helping
Right.
somebody. And so uh, at the end of the day, it really comes down to people understanding this issue and
Mhm.
caring.
Mhm.
If you have that and you have people in traditional roles of authority, whether it's a police officer or a judge, what have you, that is your springboard to getting
Mhm.
people out.
Can you explain the pimp casino relationship?
Officially, there is no pimp casino relationship. I don't know that there's any casino that would say, "Oh yes, we have relationships with pimps." That being said, I don't know that it's controversial at all to say that, particularly in Las Vegas, that the casinos are aware that the prostitution is going on, and that they have an economic incentive to not address it. And why I say that is simply this: there's a lot of misconceptions about sex work as it relates to Las Vegas. In the state of Nevada, sex work is legal in some rural counties. It is not legal in Las Vegas. Visitors to Las Vegas, however, might be uh, might not quite understand that, and so it's not in the casino's interest to say, "Oh, you know, sex work isn't legal here in Vegas. You have to go an hour out of town to get legal to legally engage in purchasing sex." The casinos have no incentive to do that because they want to keep their customers at the casinos. So as a result, it's not in their best interest to dissuade their clients from talking with or engaging with the prostitutes that might be coming to their casinos. At the same time, uh, casinos have what's known as a VIP host. These are professionals whose job it is to entertain the biggest gamblers that come to
Mhm.
their facilities. It is widely talked about in Las Vegas that VIP hosts for the biggest clients will get them whatever they'd like. And it is my understanding that that can include drugs or at times women. And so no one has told me this directly on the record, but in talking with people privately and sort of reading between the lines, my understanding is that these VIP hosts may at times have contacts with pimps when a particularly high roller desires a woman.
Mhm. Yeah. So isn't it set up where only the women that the pimps have that are going there, they don't get looked at? Like people know who they are, but if someone else walked in off the street who wasn't part of the whole, underground thing, that they weren't allowed to be there.
I do.
Like there's organized girls that are allowed to be there, and the ones that come off the street aren't.
I know what you're saying, and I've heard that that happens. I'm hesitant to say that that definitely happens, just because these interactions can be so uh, so ephemeral, and
Mhm.
so I have heard that that happens. Can I say that that happens in every situation and definitively that happens?
I was
I
just talking about
can't.
the high rollers for those particular resorts.
I think it's certainly true that that high rollers are allowed to do as they please on
Mhm.
casino properties, and they can bring with them whoever they'd like, and they really aren't questioned as a result.
Mhm.
Uh,
So even if it comes to underage.
I that that I'm told that that happens. That is certainly the word on the street in Las Vegas. I can't
Mhm.
definitively point to one particular incident in that regard, but you often can in situations like this.
Right, okay. So at the time you were investigating sex trafficking in Las Vegas, you were at the news organization that a billionaire casino owner owned. Do you feel that your reporting was ultimately killed because of the conflict of interest on the owner's part and for profit reasons?
I'll leave that up to people who read the book to come to their own conclusions on that.
Mm, okay.
I honestly don't have an answer one way or another.
Okay. Well, one of the most enraging things I read in Vegas Concierge was your interactions with Tia, Angela's old handler, and Molly Mall's right hand woman. She told you that her work was in female empowerment and that she mentored women. In your research, is there often a female counterpart to a pimp's organization?
There certainly in Molly Mall's network there was. Um, I can't necessarily point to another figure in another network like that, but it would make sense that such a thing would occur because it could be effective.
Right. Well, in Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring that JP Morgan funded, he had a woman handler in Florida.
Maxwell, yes.
Yeah. Um, I've often heard that usually they have a woman that's, you know, makes it easier for young women to feel comfortable and safe.
That's another form of manipulation.
I imagine members of our audience who are listening today have been trafficked or know of a loved one who has been trafficked. Do you have any advice on ways we can support victims and survivors of sex trafficking?
I mean, the number one thing I would say is to erase from your mind any preconceived notions about what may lead someone into this situation,
Mm,
and to remove judgment from your heart.
mm,
Uh,
that's good.
Women, men, children who have been sex trafficked deserve our compassion
Hmm.
first and foremost. And really, that's where the conversation should stop. They
Hmm.
deserve our compassion, and whatever thoughts or ideas you might have about how they could have potentially ended up in that situation need to be erased from your mind, because
Hmm.
until you understand their story from their perspective, you can't possibly uh, begin to wrap your mind around how this may have happened for them. And so as a result, uh, we need to stop overlaying judgment and criticism as part of this conversation. And I
Mm,
think if we do that, we can then begin to bring the victims and survivors out of the dark and into the light, and they can feel comfortable in receiving services and receiving care and in speaking their truth.
hmm. Yeah, that's my number one priority is that we have understanding over this issue. Because, like I said, I didn't understand it a few years ago either, and it's just such a horrible, horrible situation when women are trafficked in any way, and it can happen to anyone. A lot of people don't understand it can happen to anyone.
And it does happen
Mhm.
to everyone in our society. It can happen to everyone in our
Mhm.
society. We have this perception that it only happens to to girls like this or to women like this,
Right.
and
Mhm.
that's just not
No.
correct. Uh, Trafficking does not discriminate, and
Mm-mm.
so it's important that we don't met out our compassion. It's important that we recognize that this could happen to anyone, and as a result, we should be compassionate to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So there are some organizations that support survivors of sex trafficking and others that are not so great. Do you have any advice on how to vet those organizations to make sure we are choosing the proper organizations to support?
That's a very good question and a very insightful one.
But on your book's website, you have comprehensive pages of resources.
We do, and we felt that was very important because we didn't want to just present the story and then potentially clue in a victim and survivor that they are a victim, and then leave them to their own
Yeah, to be
devices
brave.
without having an ability to get help. In the case of the book, we we spoke with people that we trust who are familiar with the anti-trafficking movement in America, and we basically received referrals and vetted organizations uh, that people we trust believed would be responsive to victims and survivors.
Mhm.
Uh, I guess the best advice that I could give someone is to, if they're able to get a referral to an organization, talk to somebody who either is familiar with them or has worked with them,
Mhm.
to tell them, yes, that this organization is helpful, is caring, is compassionate. I recognize that that might not be something that every victim has the opportunity to do.
Mhm.
If that's the case, if it's the case that a victim is not able to get a referral to an organization, I, I I believe that it's still so important that a victim and survivor gets help, that they not use that as a reason to not reach out to an organization. My hope is that um, any organization that hears from a victim would be responsive. Of course, that doesn't always happen, but I think it's just so vitally important that victims and survivors, once they recognize within themselves that they need help, that they actually go out and seek it. And I would hate that a fear about an organization being properly responsive would stop a victim from getting help.
Mhm. I didn't know there were organizations out there that weren't good.
I mean, I would not want to besmirch any organization. I think in talking with survivors and other people involved in the anti-trafficking movement, there's a belief that some organizations are more responsive than others.
Mhm.
Some do a better job of answering the phone, or are maybe more compassionate, more understanding, more familiar with the issue. Uh, Again, I would never want to
Mhm.
say that
Yeah.
one organization is better than the other, or
Right.
dissuade someone from going to any organization for help.
Right.
But we are humans, and as a result, there can be some that are more helpful than others.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know. So today, Molly Mall is a free man. He has 4.7 million followers on Instagram. He was recently a producer on a Grammy award winning album. Do you think the story of Molly Mall and sex trafficking is over?
The honest answer is that I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that I have an answer to
Yeah, I
that
guess
beyond
who
that.
knows, right?
I don't.
Hopefully.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm in a place to speculate beyond that.
That's true. Okay. What positive impacts have you seen Vegas Concierge create since its publishing?
I've been most gratified in hearing from readers who have found that the book to be educational, and to providing an authentic picture of
Hmm.
what trafficking looks like in America today. My sincerest hope is that this book will continue to educate the general public about what this issue looks like, and it can down the line perhaps lead to this becoming a greater priority in our society.
Hmm. Is your reporting on sex trafficking complete?
I hope not.
I hope
I
not.
mean, at the moment, I'm at the moment I'm a freelancer. At the moment I'm focused on spreading the word about this book. But I would, love the opportunity to continue reporting on this issue. Absolutely.
Do you know of any other city in the US that's like what's going on in Vegas happening in other cities?
Well, each city is unique. Vegas, of course, is its own animal, but there are, large. Uh, there are cities with big sex trafficking problems outside of Vegas as well. Um,
Hmm. I heard Nashville.
I've heard a number of cities,
Mhm.
cities, that are, high profile, big cities
Mhm.
where it has been said that it is a problem. Again, I'm very as a researcher, I'm very careful to speak to what I know directly.
Mhm.
I haven't intimately researched other cities, so I can't really speak
Mm, okay.
definitively about the issues they may or may not have. But I am very interested in continuing this work if I'm at all able to.
Mhm. Yeah, I do hope so. When you hear the powerful statement from now on, how would you end that sentence?
From now on, sex trafficking is a priority amongst American society to eliminate.
Mhm. A big priority. Where can people buy your book and follow you with your reporting?
It might be a little cheesy to say, but Vegas Concierge is available wherever books are sold.
Mhm.
It's available on Amazon. You can also visit our website, vegasconciergebook.com, and we
Mhm.
have links to a number of booksellers where you can
Mhm.
purchase the book. It's also available through your local independent bookstores.
Mhm.
It's also available, I should mention, on Kindle, and we have an audio version of the book that I'm particularly proud of.
Mhm. Yeah, I love how it's narrated. It's such a fascinating book. I learned
Thank you.
so much.
As I said, I'm very proud of our audiobook, which
Mhm.
features not only my voice, but the voice of Angela and
Mhm.
Don as well.
Mhm. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate the hard work that you're doing. Please continue.
Thank you. Like I
Mhm.
said, I'd love the opportunity to keep doing this work.
Awesome. This is From Now On. I'm Lisa Phillips. And until next time, stay informed, stay empowered, and remember, there is strength in speaking out. And special thanks to our informative guest, Brian Joseph. Elizabeth Wyndham is our senior producer. Christopher Leon is the editor. Corey Wynn is our director of photography. And Jose Oriana is our studio producer. Our theme music is Many Worlds by Memory Theory. If you have any thoughts, questions, or stories about your own views on topics discussed on From Now On, email us at fromnowonpod@gmail.com. And please follow, rate, comment, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. If today's conversation resonated with you and you are seeking more support in your own healing journey, if you or someone you know has been sexually assaulted, help is available. Call 800-656-HOPE. If you or someone you know is being trafficked, contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. Text 233-733. That's Be Free. PAVE is a 501c3 nonprofit creating a world free from sexual violence and building communities to support survivors. To learn more, go to shatteringthesilence.org. Speak Out, Act, Reclaim, SOAR, is dedicated to providing a safe and empowering space for survivors of sex trafficking to reclaim their stories and stand up for themselves and each other. That's www.speakoutactreclaim.org.